Hi, and welcome to this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and today we're going to focus on elder abuse. We're going to have a couple of guests today. First, we are going to have Jennifer Rezendes, and I want to make sure I get your title right, the Protective Services Clinical Director, which is a long thing to have on a business card for Bristol Elder Services. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We'll have District Attorney Tom Quinn in just a moment as well. But Jen, let's start with you. And I mean, the basic question for people is, what is elder abuse?
Jim, elder abuse is actually defined as an act or omission which results in significant physical or emotional abuse or financial exploitation of an elder. And for our purposes, an elder is considered someone age 60 and older.
How prevalent is it in Bristol County?
Unfortunately, it is quite prevalent. Bristol Elder Services handles over 350 elder abuse reports a month. And that's in 23 communities that we serve. And we're the largest protective service unit in the state of Massachusetts in terms of the volume of reports that we receive.
I saw a national stat which I thought was really humbling when you think about it, that 1 in 10 Americans 60 and over experience some sort of elder abuse over the course of a year. I mean, that's staggering, really.
Exactly.
What does elder abuse look like?
Well,
and that's a loaded question because I know there are different, I mean, you mentioned emotional, financial,
correct,
psychological. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into that.
There are actually 6 categories of abuse that we investigate. So the physical, emotional, sexual abuse, neglect, financial exploitation, and self-neglect, which people don't always realize is considered under abuse, self-abuse. Physical abuse is probably the one that comes to mind most often because it's a little more visibly recognized. So obvious signs that you may see, someone being hit, pushed, shoved, kicked, maybe an object thrown at them, and that would result in some type of an injury. Not always, but it's a little more easily identified if there's a bruise, a cut, a laceration. Even some situations, they might be red marks from someone being grabbed or finger or hand imprints as a result. Emotional abuse, it's a little grayer area, but it could incorporate things such as an elder being yelled at. They might be sworn at on a routine basis, belittled, threatened with maybe nursing home placement, threatened with not being able to provide them with care any longer. And that could result in, a little more subtle changes if people should be aware of and try and recognize. Maybe there's change in an individual's sleep habits or appetite. They may have increasing anxiety, worry. They may be more tearful to the extreme, which might be the point that someone might be suicidal. Sexual abuse, as most people would think, they don't always think of sexual abuse when they look at elders, but it does incorporate about 1% of the reports that we receive here in Bristol County, but also on a statewide average. And that would be anything from inappropriate touching, fondling, rape, any type of inappropriate sexual contact, even someone who might be talking inappropriately sexually to an elder. And that would be looked at in terms of, there might be some fear, shame, belittlement, any trauma to any specific genital area, breasts, things of that nature. Even someone may end up having a sexually transmitted disease as a result of some sexual abuse.
You talk about, too, and I don't mean to interrupt, but the one thing that I wanted to make sure at the start, too, is your office deals with elder abuse for 60 and above.
Correct.
And the other thing I think that's interesting, too, when we're talking about elder abuse, it's not just women. I mean, it's men, too. It's both.
Yes.
And definitely. You see both.
Definitely. I think it's probably more reported for women because it might be a little more identified, but we do have a large percentage of males that fall under our category, unfortunately.
Who are the abusers?
That's a good question. Obviously, anyone can be an abuser, but very often we see family members, friends, specific caregivers that are the ones that end up being the abusers for the elders that we see. There has to be some type of a relationship, in a caregiver role. There has to be that provided for them under a neglect category. That's another category that we would be looking into. So anyone that might be providing them with services, whether they're paid or unpaid, would be considered a caregiver.
I'm curious with the neglect, because I know that having an elderly mother a while ago, but she wanted to be independent too. And I guess there's, as I learned during that tenure, is there's a balancing act between letting them be free, I guess is the word, or independent is probably a better word, and sort of doing what you said is to take care of them. And so I would assume there's a gray area with that one.
There is, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because we do strive for elders to be as independent and safe as possible in their own home. So they do have the right to self-determination. So people have the right to make poor choices, as long as they are competent and understand, the risks involved with making those poor choices. So they can make bad decisions, and that's not always an easy thing to accept, especially when it's a family member that you care about. So we try and become involved, provide some assistance and services to help either mitigate or alleviate whatever that abusive situation may be.
So there are some instances that you deal with that you, as you just said, you try to correct the situation or help the situation. I mean, there are others that are clearly crime.
Exactly.
But there are others that, I guess it's more the independent ones, trying to be independent, that you try to work that out.
Right, and that probably would fall under our self-neglect component very often.
Right.
People want to be in their own home. We understand that. Most of us would be, even if it's an abusive situation. Especially if it's a family member. There's a lot of mixed feelings. When you have a family member that might be abusive toward you. Fear, belittlement, humiliation, shame, denial. So those are all difficult things to accept and then make the change in order to alleviate that situation.
It's curious, I read a lot of cases don't even get reported. Why?
I think for a few reasons. I think in the last few years it's been much better in terms of people identifying. But not everyone understands elder abuse. I don't think everyone thinks of abuse. I think most people, when they hear abuse, they think maybe child abuse. But elder abuse is very prevalent. And I think getting the word out, making people aware and educated what it is, how to recognize it, makes a difference, and then it will get reported appropriately, and hopefully we'll be able to intervene and help those individuals who are being abused, neglected, or exploited.
And the victims themselves a lot of times don't report it either.
Correct.
I would assume, and I don't know, but I'm assuming fear probably is the biggest factor.
Yes. And again, if it's a family member, they don't want to get their family member in trouble. Even they might be abused and being treated very poorly, it's still their family member and they love them. So it's very hard in terms of, going in, trying to build rapport with an elder so they can feel that they can trust you enough that they can share this information, because it's really personal information about their living situation and what's happening to them. It's not an easy situation for them.
Somebody comes, well, I don't know if they come to you. When you get the call, or let me step back, there are different ways, I guess, to report elder abuse.
Correct.
Where do people go?
First, I would suggest, if they have any concerns of elder abuse, that they call the Massachusetts Elder Abuse Hotline. That number is 1-800-922-2275, and that's staffed 24/7. Anyone can file a report, at any point in time. They would give the information to a hotline worker. That information gets typed up into a report, and then it would go to the individual agencies that cover that area where that elder resides. The second way that they can file a report in Massachusetts is a web-based report. And in the last 3 years, the state has put in a system of reporting online, mainly for professionals, to make it a little easier for them in order to report at any point in time. And that would be on the mass.gov website under elder abuse.
What happens when you get the case or you get the situation?
We look at the reports that we receive. We determine whether it meets reportable condition criteria for us to screen in and conduct an investigation, or if it doesn't, it gets screened out. If we do look at investigating, we have a 30-day investigation period. It gets assigned to a worker, and that worker would go out, make a home visit with that elder, try and build rapport and trust, like I mentioned, gather as much information as possible, And then they also would reach out to any collateral contacts that might be involved with that elder to gain more information regarding their situation, so we can determine whether we can substantiate or unsubstantiate the abuse that was reported, or other concerns that we may uncover during the course of the investigation that weren't initially identified. So we're looking at the bigger picture to make sure that everything is being considered at that point in time.
You touched on some of the characteristics earlier, but I just want to make sure that people understand. If there's suspected elder abuse going on, what should you notice in the victim? What characteristics, so that they know that something might be going on and they should make a call?
I would say for any changes, in the situation of that elder. So maybe you may see an elder who has increased bruises or injuries, and that in and of itself, does not constitute abuse, but it might be a red flag to be aware of and to keep an eye on the situation. Maybe they are having frequent falls now. Maybe they're having injuries as a result.
Which wouldn't be the
Right.
physical abuse that you're
Right, but
initially
it could be a
talking.
self-neglect
Correct.
concern.
Yep.
So changes in that, they're getting injured, maybe lack of medical treatment or care, maybe they're more isolated, that, you used to see them every day, maybe they used to, come to the mailbox, it's your neighbor, elderly neighbor, they used to get the mail, now you haven't seen them in a while, the activities maybe that they used to do, that they were more engaged, that might be changing, they maybe have a loss of interest, they may have a change in their behavior in terms of their emotional functioning, maybe significant weight loss. So there's a wide variety of things that people should keep an eye out for.
It's a neighborhood thing too. It's not just a family thing, but
Correct.
it's like, you just kind of touched upon it. If your neighbor if you haven't seen him or her getting the mail or the newspaper or something,
Right.
Sort of just being the one to knock on the door, I guess, and say, "Are you okay?"
What I would stress is take notice. Just be aware of things that might have changed, and then take action. You can file a report. There is no harm in filing, and that's what I tell people all the time, is if you have a concern, I would rather have you file a report, and it may not be something that we would be looking into, but I'd rather have us look at it and then make that determination, as opposed to it not getting filed and then someone might be being abused.
How important is it, and we got about 30 seconds, but how important is it to review visiting nurse visiting nurse places and things like that before hiring people to work for your parents or elderly or something like that? I would assume getting good reviews is important.
Right, and very often when we make recommendations to individuals or family members, if they're looking to hire individuals to provide care to their elderly, family member, that they look at getting, like you said, references, query checks, in some instances as well, to make sure that people are appropriate in terms of providing care, because you're letting someone into your home,
Right.
and they may have sort of carte blanche, access to that individual. They may have a memory impairment, they may have some dementia going on, so they may not be able to recognize it themselves, and you're entrusting your elderly family member to an individual to care for them. So I would say just be aware.
Right.
And if people can be as proactive as possible to look at the situation. So, and hopefully, with this education and awareness, it will help prevent an elder from being abused.
Jennifer, how can people get in touch with you if they have any questions about the issue?
Any questions can be directed to Bristol Elder Services. Our main number is 508-675-2101, and they can ask to speak with someone in the Protective Services Unit. Jennifer
Rezendes, our guest in the first half of the program. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All righty. We'll be right back with District Attorney Thomas Quinn in just a moment. Hi, and welcome back to A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall, and joining us now in this half of the program is Bristol County District Attorney Thomas Quinn. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
A very serious topic. I know that you are very involved with this. You have a part of your office that deals specifically with elder abuse. Tell us how prevalent is elder abuse in Bristol County?
Well, Jim, it's very prevalent in Bristol County, and it's prevalent throughout the country. When I became the DA about 6.5 years ago, I made it a point of focusing on elder fraud and abuse, and created a unit to investigate the cases that are brought to our attention. But it's all over the place is the bottom line. So my feeling is our elder folks made this country what it is. They've worked hard, and to the best that it can be, we want them to try to enjoy the latter part of their lives. And if people are going to abuse them and it's brought to our attention, we're going to try to investigate it and hold people accountable.
Is there a more certain type of elder abuse that goes on more than others that you notice?
I think primarily the scams that have occurred during the past few years.
The phone scams are
phone
brutal.
Scams. I've gone, when I started, I've gone out, I think, to every council on aging at least once and other elder groups to speak about this, because the easiest way to deal with it is not to get involved in the first place.
Right.
But you're dealing with vulnerable victims who, A, may be alone or are at home. They may be isolated in some cases, but they have time, and the phone is ringing all day long if you're at home. And if you don't know the number, for the most part, you don't want to answer the phone. Because once you do, these individuals are crafty, and they can get you into giving personal information. I've had it happen to family members, a Social Security number under the guise of Social Security that a claim, or the IRS.
Yes.
I've gotten calls about the IRS scam. You're going to be arrested, give us this information, but once they part with that information, whether it's a credit card, Social Security number, they can be subject to a scam, or even worse, giving money. Another scam that has occurred is a grandparent scam where...
Yeah, and I've heard of that,
Yeah.
which seems, I don't know, I seem... How does a grandparent not realize that it's not their grandchild, but if they haven't seen him in a while, or...
Objectively, you would think that's the case,
Yeah.
but in reality, all of a sudden I get a call and somebody says, oh, your grandchild is in custody in Washington State, and I've had personal experience, people telling me this at these events. Going to be in jail, we need $1,000 bail. Now all of a sudden, it's, if an elder person is taken off guard, frightened, they may send the money. In fact, one particular case, which was in this county, after getting a call and being startled, seeing a person's under arrest, whether it was in Canada, the Washington State area, Canada, please send the money to Mexico. Now that would be, an indication it's a scam, but you're vulnerable, you're old, you're scared, and then all of a sudden, the individual went down to a local pharmacy, was going to do it, but a clerk intervened and stopped it. So these people would not be doing it if it wasn't successful.
Right.
Florida, I remember reading articles down there a few years back. It must be massive because you have a high concentration of elderly people, but you're under arrest, in trouble, send $5,000, and this was kind of a happy ending in this particular case. The scam artist who got $5,000 in Florida from the grandparents, his girlfriend, when she saw the money, said he doesn't work. She turned him into the police, but that's the only way that person was caught. So many of these, once you part with the money, in many of these cases, it's over. You can't track it or investigate it or prosecute it because it's done with these numbers that are quickly discarded. So there's a number of scams out there. I've heard recently there's been, I guess it's referred to by some as a dating scam, where someone calls up the elderly and tries to entice them into a potential romantic relationship, but obviously it comes with a cost. We have a case we're investigating, involves a lot of money that was turned over, and in this case the potential victim is not cooperative. So, as was mentioned a few minutes ago, people have their privacy. They can make mistakes and poor judgments to us, but unless it's a clear crime, they have a right to do that. They may ruin themselves and their family financially, but they do have a right to make poor decisions. So it's a balance of privacy, respecting people's privacy, but also trying to do something when people are taken advantage of.
Interesting, and I know we talked about it with Jen, but I'm curious because according to what I read, the stats, it says a lot of people don't report these incidents. And I'm curious, and I guess, as Jen was saying, it's curious why they don't, or why people who might suspect it don't.
Well, suspecting it is one thing, being the victim of it's another.
Right.
it's going to come from phone scams, that's one category, but the in-home abuse is going to come from family members or someone you hire to bring into the home. In the end, a mother or father, it's awful difficult to call to the police on your child who you love and who, whatever their issues are, is taking advantage of you. It's humiliating. And there's also a sense of loyalty to the family member. However, individuals are elderly should not have to put up with that. And the fact that a family member is stealing money from you or intimidating you into giving money is not right.
And I was just going to say, I mean, we talk about scams, but that's another one that comes up, as you said. It's a family member that
Absolutely.
is at home and just taking the money or cashing a Social Security check or something.
Well, the phone scams, as I said, are one category, but once you give access to someone to your home, like someone who's assisting you, or obviously a family member has access if they're living there or you have a relationship, that's where a lot of the fraud occurs. I think people, we're going to do a training with a local bank that we've done some in the past, but there's an indication that during the past year, during the pandemic, more cases have come up where a elder person comes in with a family member and they're withdrawing money, and it's most likely under the guy, I wouldn't say guys, but they're probably being intimidated to do it, if not intimidated, coerced to get the money. And but how you stop that's a different matter. It's kind of tough to say to the mother, don't give your son money.
Right.
It's their money, they have a right to do it. But I think being aware of it, and I think the banks have been pretty good about that, alerting people about things that, and unfortunately, there's a balance. They have a customer who has privacy. On the other hand, you see something where somebody's withdrawing $10,000 and the person standing next to them. They at least are on the lookout for it.
In your community affairs unit, reading about it, I mean, you've been aggressive. The unit's been aggressive. You mentioned training with the banks, but training different organizations with regard to elder abuse.
Yes, that's correct.
And how I mean, there's different things to train too. I mean, it's different organizations. That's a lot of ground to cover.
Well, Eric Poulin, who was here with me today, has done a lot of good work in the elderly community. He's responsible for the elder affairs, if you will, and as I said, we're putting a training together, but he comes to meet every council on aging. He makes presentations on the potential pitfalls of getting involved in these financial scams, because the key is prevention. The vast majority of these cases cannot be prosecuted.
Really?
If I call you up on the phone and say, and you give me the money, that trace is gone shortly thereafter.
Okay.
You need a willing victim to come forward and say, my son is stealing money from me.
Right, yeah.
Tough to do. We've had some cases we've successfully prosecuted where individuals who are assisting in the home health aides, have stolen large amounts of money, and we've successfully prosecuted those cases. But number one, they have to be brought to our attention, and you have to have a victim who's saying, this person, I left X amount of money there and they've taken it. And it was mentioned, when you give people access to the home, you have to be very careful about that when you're allowing someone to come in, because that's where the problems start. All of a sudden the individual, in many cases they do very loving, kind work to take care of elderly, but start taking the person to the bank, start withdrawing money. Once that happens, all of a sudden money could be given to them. They're taking money. And that's how it happens. It's not necessarily somebody stealing $50,000 at a pop, although people are scammed over the phone large amounts of money. So access to people, you have to be very careful about it. And I think that even though it's a family member, we can balance the scales if the matter is brought to our attention, but you shouldn't be treated like that.
And as you said too, I mean, the prevention and the training, again, that's where your community affairs unit comes in to talk to various groups. Various groups,
because here it is, the phone rings right now. You don't recognize the number. Do you know anybody in Missouri who wants to get a hold of you? Or Alabama or Phoenix? The answer is no, because if it's your family member, you know the number. Nothing good's coming from those calls. I get them all the time. I don't answer the phone at home. The vast majority of my calls I do not answer. home line.
Yep.
Somebody leaves a message as a legitimate person, then you can call them back. But when you're at home and you see the number and you get a little... In fact, the other night, there's a number coming in. My wife is on my phone. I think my wife answered. I said, don't answer the phone. That's not a call for me.
And the other thing, too, and I'm sure that your crew has done it, it's on the cell phones now, too.
Absolutely.
It's not just the home phones. I mean, they're targeting cell phones.
No, especially with the information that's out there of phone numbers. Absolutely, and that's where I get calls. If I don't generally recognize a number, I don't answer the phone. And if it's a legitimate call, they'll leave a number and I'll call it back. But those, in many cases, are scams, especially if there's a hesitation at first. But that's where I get the IRS calls, with the threats of a warrant. So unfortunately, in this day and age, not much good is going to come over the phone by people calling you that you don't know.
If people have questions for you and for your for the office, where should they go? Who should they contact?
Well, they can, they can make a general inquiry about what the issue is, and if it's a financial crimes issue. So we do both elder fraud, physical abuse, and financial fraud, and also financial crimes, which is a difficult area because it's very intensive, the investigation. But they would be directed to our financial crimes unit. The head of our unit is Mike Scott, who's an attorney who oversees it. We have about approximately 4 members in 4 employees in that unit itself, so they could be directed to one of those employees and or Eric Poulin, who could assist them. It may not be a criminal matter, and we're ultimately going to deal with, is it a criminal matter? Is there a crime involved? There's a basis to investigate it as a crime.
That's kind of like what Jen was saying too. There's gray areas in some of those things too, as you said right when you first came on it. I mean, people are allowed to make bad decisions.
They are, and that's true, and it's unfortunate, but you have your free will, and if someone calls me up and befriends me and I give them $10,000, absent some fraudulent transaction, you have the right to do it.
Yeah.
Now, it's not a good idea, but that's the dilemma, is free will, the right to make these poor decisions. Look, there's a lot of lonely people, there's a lot of isolated people. I mean, I don't know what I'd be doing if I was at home all day and I get a call and all of a sudden they're saying something and you're not sure what it is, and then they give me a social security number or a credit card number. The fraud is massive.
Well, I thank you for coming in. It's been an interesting topic today for sure, with you and Jen coming in. And again, people who need to contact your office, I guess the phone number best to call.
Yes, and then they'd be directed to the financial crimes unit.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
We'll have you back, I'm sure, down the road. Thank you.
My pleasure.
That's going to do it for this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and we'll see you again soon.